I checked Allstate first and saved hundreds on my car insurance.
Please welcome Charles Woodson.
Unfortunately, I didn't check to see if anyone was watching before I stole cotton candy from a child. Checking Allstate first was really smart. Not checking the Jumbotron, not smart. Well, at least I checked Allstate first and saved hundreds. Was it worth it? Yeah.
Alka-Seltzer Plus Cold or Flu Fizzy Chews. Chew, fizz. Feel better fast. No water needed. Alka-Seltzer Plus Fizzy Chews.
At the Farmer's Dog, our recipe is more than the ingredients we choose. It's what we choose to do with them. Developed by our vet nutritionists, all our food is made to the highest safety standards and has clinically proven benefits. It's gently cooked to deliver the nutrients your dog needs without the ultra-processing. Because good ingredients matter, but the best recipes call for so much more. Get 50% off your first box, available only at thefarmersdog.com.
Sunday, just after President Trump's primetime address to the nation, and as tensions mount with Venezuela and warning signs over the economy grow, Kristen Welker sits down with Senators Lindsey Graham and Tim Kaine. Sunday on Meet the Press.
A Cessna C550 crashed while landing at the Statesville Airport.
This gun violence is leaving deep scars in families across communities.
Stream extended coverage on WCNC+. Download on your TV and watch for free.
Finally, there's good news tonight about a restaurant staff coming together for one of their own, with a surprise for a soon-to-be dad just in time for the holidays. The restaurant staff at First Watch in Naples, Florida knows how to boogie down, especially at their holiday party. But this year was a little different.
Something more important came up. So everybody knows about Norman's journey, trying to adopt a baby. These guys decided that it was more important for us to donate all of that money to you and your wife.
The soon-to-be dad left speechless.
I just broke down. I didn't know what to think or what to say.
Norman and his wife Alicia have struggled for years to have a baby, eventually deciding to pursue adoption. Now they will soon bring home a baby girl.
We're beyond blessed that we have all these wonderful, great people that, had this thought in their heads and the kindness in their heart and decided to share it with us.
That moment, bringing his work family and his growing family together.
In a kitchen staff, you're in everybody's life.
We're always thinking about how we can help others and, brighten someone else's day. And so for that to come back, to us, it's just completely overwhelming.
And guess what? That restaurant CEO says they're going to get their Christmas party as well. That's Nightly News for this Thursday. I'm Tom Llamas. Thanks so much for watching. Tonight and always, we're here for you. Good night.
Left, right, it doesn't matter. This is what happened today.
I want to be able to form my own opinions.
The WCNC Plus TV app, streaming 24/7. Local news from the team you trust.
Oh, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight here on WCNC Plus inside our Impact Studio. There's been a lot of breaking news today. We're going to start with one of the biggest headlines, not just here in North Carolina, but really across the United States. Racing legend Greg Biffle and part of his family killed in a crash. 7 individuals were killed just this morning after 10 o'clock in Statesville, North Carolina at the airport. We want to bring in Nathaniel, who does so many different things behind the scenes here at WCNC Charlotte, but you have an intricate working knowledge not only of NASCAR, but really how, Mr. Biffle, one of the top 75 drivers in NASCAR, right, has had such an impact not only on the sport of NASCAR, but really motorsport as a whole, Nathan. So let's just start there. I mean, this man was a racing driver through and through, wasn't he?
Sure, absolutely. And wish we were here talking under better circumstances about his career or about NASCAR in general, but absolutely devastated by the news today to hear that he was killed in this plane crash along with several members of his family and other people as well. But yeah, Greg Biffle, just an absolute icon. I mean, when you think about 2000s NASCAR, there are a few names for NASCAR fans who come to your mind, like Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Matt Kenseth. Greg Biffle's right there. I mean, he was there with Roush Racing for well over a decade. And really, I mean, Brad Keselowski, who now owns RFK Racing, who is the current incarnation of the team that Biffle drove for, he said it well that Greg Biffle helped define the era. He helped define that team in the 2000s. Roush Racing became such an enormous racing juggernaut in NASCAR in the 2000s, and I think part of that is because of Greg Biffle. It's because of Mark Martin. It's because of Matt Kenseth. You know, these drivers were so good around that time, and he was great at that. And I think what you're seeing a lot from everyone who's paying tribute to him, and I want to make sure I do this as well, is just the work that he did outside of racing, I think, was so important because, you know, obviously what we've heard is after Hurricane Helene, he was flying his helicopter out to Western North Carolina, delivering supplies. He was helping really with that. And I know we were on top of that coverage, of course, when Hurricane Helene hit and you know, seeing all these people coming together from the community helping out. And he was there, you know, he wasn't just a guy, you know, who lives off Lake Norman or wherever he lived and has a helicopter. You know, he was using his value, using his status to do something really good and impactful for the community. And outside of that, when he was racing, he was very outspoken on animal rights and doing stuff for animal charities and shelters. And so, you know, just a really all-around great guy, and just absolutely heartbroken to hear about this news today.
Yeah, I mean, I think all of us remember the images of him in his helicopter, right? That black helicopter dropping off loads of water and food to individuals. And honestly, you know, I know there was a lot of operations ongoing at the state and federal level, but you know, Mr. Biffle was one of the first people to be in contact with so many individuals in Western North Carolina. I remember in one specific case where there was a family they got his attention up in the helicopter with a large mirror. And I just remember he put out on X telling individuals that if that was your family, he made contact with them. I just the essence of care around all these little details that he had. I'm sure he carried that over from NASCAR, but just the immense humanitarian response, right? He was there with Jamaica, and we rolled a clip earlier today about how he felt so far away, but that he still felt like he needed to do something for the people in Jamaica. And so he did have a calling and felt like, he had a stage and a platform to be able to utilize, which I think so many people think and maybe don't think about, right, early on in their career and maybe utilize it later on. But I think he really understood, what his career was for and how to really carry himself. So, we are talking a lot about what he did after racing, but I mean, he put motorsport on the map. I mean, not just NASCAR with stock cars, but also truck racing, right? I mean, people, we can't forget. I mean, he was in the truck series for quite a long time as well, right?
Yeah, he's definitely started his career like any racer down in lower series, but had kind of a meteoric rise out in the early 2000s. Went in there, won the 2000 truck title. Won the 2002 Busch Series, what is now they just changed the name this year, NASCAR O'Reilly Auto Parts Series.
That's right.
Before, for a long time, it was the Xfinity Series. It changes. But he was the first driver to ever do that, to win the championship in both of those series. So
wow.
I just remember during his whole career, you would always hear that all the time. Greg Biffle, at the time, because two guys have done it since, but you would always hear, he's the only one who's ever done this. He's the only one who's ever done this.
Right.
And we were always hoping that he would maybe win the Cup Series title and be the first one to have that triple crown, like win all three of those. But he never did get that. But he did. He was very competitive as well in the Cup Series. But yeah, just throughout his whole career, just one of those guys you never count out. Was someone who was always a threat to win just about every week. I mean, part of that is the team he drove for was so dominant, like I said, in the 2000s. But he helped bring that up because, when he came in to Roush Racing in the early 2000s, they were really anchored by Mark Martin. He was the cornerstone driver of the team throughout the 1990s.
Yeah.
And then they brought in Matt Kenseth in 2000, and he was doing really well as well. But they were always trying to search for that third car, that third driver. And, they tried guys like Kevin LePage or Ted Musgrave or whoever, and never really stuck out. But then Greg Biffle came in 2003 in his rookie year, still in that third car. So you're thinking, and I know you're an F1 guy, so you might know sort of how it works, how like some teams, like even within the same team, might get more resources than others.
Exactly.
And he has that third car that maybe isn't getting as much attention as the other two are, but he still is able to come out in 2003 in his rookie year and win a race. He won the Pepsi 400 at Daytona. He beat out my favorite all-time driver, Bobby Labonte, so I'm still a little bitter about it 22 years later. But he won that race, and I feel like that kind of put him on the map to go out and have the kind of career he had. He nearly won the championship in 2005, narrowly lost it out to Tony Stewart. But, he and all of Roush Racing in the 2000s, and really that kind of anchored that when you think of like Ford drivers in the 2000s. So to me, when I remember him as a racer, like those are the things I'll remember, and an absolute great competitor, and it's a shame that he's no longer with us.
It is. I did reach out to Mr. Denny Hamlin, DM'd him because he said about 47 minutes ago on X that Mr. Biffle was a champion on the track, and of course a humanitarian off of it. But he alluded to being one of the fiercest competitors that he had witnessed. What went into that? I mean, because you witnessed it, yourself personally watching NASCAR. Why was he regarded as one of the fiercest competitors? As you said, he was always in it, just kind of never letting up, right, and getting off the pedal, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys who, just had talent. You might think of guys like Kyle Busch or now I guess Denny Hamlin, who are kind of a little more aggressive, would kind of ride you up to the wall a little bit. Greg Biffle was never a guy who struck me like that. Was never a guy who was gonna really put the wheel onto someone's bumper if he needed to. He just knew how to get it done, and never. I mean, he had a couple run-ins with a couple guys here and there, as every racer does, but never anything that I think like really defined him as an aggressive driver, like a really clean-nosed kind of guy who just had talent and could get it done, I guess is the best way to summarize it.
Yeah. Well, love to hear your expertise, Nathan, as I know you're an aficionado, an expert on NASCAR and so many players and characters over the last couple of decades. So it's great to have some thoughts as you yourself have witnessed many of these races. So again, want to thank you for your time. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break, folks. We're going to continue our coverage here on this plane crash that killed 7 individuals, including Greg Biffle and his wife and 2 children. We'll be back in 2 minutes. All right, welcome back, everyone. Thanks for joining us here again inside the Impact Studio. Going to continue with our coverage of this airplane crash in Statesville that affected the Biffle family and, of course, is resonating through the NASCAR world. Our own Nate Morabito did speak to a former NTSB investigator just about what this looks like. We got the flight plan. We do have some of the data behind this. It's very preliminary, as I said, but we do want to play this interview for you to give you more information on what could have happened. Listen to this.
21 years. And what was kind of the extent of the job that you did while there?
During my course as an accident investigator with the NTSB, I was a field investigator, unit supervisor, regional director, and then I led the GO team out of Washington, D.C. on major accident investigations the last 10 plus years of my career. So I investigated Value Jet, American 1420 at Little Rock, and a number of other major events, aircraft accident events, not only here in the United States, but around the world.
So you are a consultant now still? Is that kind of
I
your job?
am consulting. I do accident investigation training for clients, corporate clients, as well as airlines and unions. And I enhance aviation safety through my podcast and YouTube channel and just education. That's the big thing about lessons learned from accident investigations.
All right, so we have very limited information on what happened when Greg Biffle and his family were killed in this plane crash here in North Carolina today. Initial thoughts based on what you've seen, what we should be asking, what we should know about the circumstances.
Well, there are a number of things based on this early information. One, of course, is the fact that apparently during the takeoff and immediate departure, the aircraft experienced some sort of mechanical malfunction or failure. Apparently, from what I've been able to glean, there are witnesses that heard possibly a loud bang or explosion, and then there may have been some fire with the aircraft in flight. That would indicate, or at least focus investigators on the back end of the airplane, because that's where both engines reside. And if there was a catastrophic engine failure, one, you would hear a very loud bang or explosion type noise, and two, because the fuel system is back there, of course, if they couldn't get the fuel system shut off for that engine that may have failed, now all of a sudden you still have fuel coming out at a very high volume, and if it ignites, now you have a trail of fire and smoke.
You know, you saw kind of the path. Tell me your questions about that, why that's to you seemed a bit unusual.
When you look at the flight path based on the ADS-B, which is a better fidelity radar, if you will, of the aircraft, they take off, they start to climb, they get up to around 2,000 feet, which you always want altitude. Altitude gives a pilot time to sort things out. It's apparent that they decided that they needed to return expeditiously back to the airport. Now, when you look at the flight path, and if they really understood the criticality of the nature of the problem, especially if it was a catastrophic failure of the engine, you want to get the airplane back on the ground immediately. You don't necessarily need to fly a specific flight pattern, if you will, that you would normally fly. You declare an emergency and you head straight back to a runway. And in this case, I see that in the flight path, it looks like they're trying to fly a normalized pattern to get back to the runway that they took off on, rather than just immediately make a better than a 180-degree turn. It's more like around a 200-degree turn, and land opposite direction. Land slightly downwind if you need to, but get the airplane on the ground under control. And that's the key. The question for the investigators will be, did the pilots lose control of the aircraft, which resulted in them landing short of the runway? That's going to be a critical question. Who was flying the airplane, since this is a single pilot certified aircraft? Greg Biffle was a certificated pilot. He was rated to fly multi-engine airplanes, but he was not certificated or rated to fly this type of aircraft. That is a business jet, this Cessna Citation. But if he was working with the pilot who was flying, or at least presumed to be flying, his professional pilot, were they doing things in concert? Was one running the checklist while the other was flying the airplane? These are the operational type questions that the NTSB investigators will have to try and answer.
You're telling me when we pull his pilot certification, he is not allowed to fly this plane solely based on the certificate that he has. Am I right?
Yes, Greg Biffle was a certificated pilot. He held a private pilot certificate, which is, other than a student certificate, is the lowest level. There is a commercial pilot certification and then airline transport, which is the highest. He held a private pilot certificate for single engine airplanes, for multi-engine airplanes under 12,500 pounds, or that were not turbojet or turbofan aircraft. And then he also held a helicopter rating as well.
So essentially, you can't just fly this plane without having someone else with that certification specific for that kind of plane.
In this case, Mr. Biffle could occupy a pilot's seat. He could actually manipulate the flight controls under the coaching or instruction of a certified pilot on that particular airplane.
Okay, so let's talk just real briefly, the age of the airplane, 1981, that's 44 years old. So tell me, red flag or not?
One of the big issues that a lot of people make a big deal about, especially those that don't understand aviation, is when they hear that this airplane was built in 1981, they always immediately think this is an old airplane. Things are going to happen, things are going to break. That's not true. If we were required to maintain our automobiles like we're required to maintain an aircraft, your car would last 30 or 40 years, almost in new condition. It is based on the repetitive inspections that are required for this type of aircraft. And of course, it'll come down to what kind of maintenance had been done in the recent past, not only on the airframe, but also on those engines. Was there a chronic problem? Was there a symptomatic issue that had developed, in the recent past? Was it maintained properly? These are the kinds of questions that the NTSB will put together with regard to maintenance records. They'll go through the maintenance records. They'll interview the maintenance personnel who have touched this airplane and maintain the airplane. And then, of course, the ultimate responsibility for airworthiness of the aircraft resides with the pilot. They must do a pre-flight walk around, as well as from the exterior as well as the interior, to ensure that the airplane is in an airworthy condition for safe operation. All of these factors will take time to develop. I don't know if this airplane had a cockpit voice recorder and or a flight data recorder or some sort of recording device. Some airplanes are required to have them, some aren't. So we'll see if there's any electronic witness type equipment on this airplane, so that will assist investigators to try and determine what may have been going on in flight.
And we don't have access, that for whatever reason they're not on live ATC, so we can't hear what radio traffic was going on at the time. I noticed there was a bit of a federal rule or recommendation related to these engines not too long ago, related to bird strikes and that kind of thing. Any red flags with the particular kind of engine? And I want to look at, to make sure I tell you right, what kind it is. It is, got it right here. Canada. All right, just wanted to make sure I get it right.
What?
PNW Canada.
Yeah, they're
JT15D1.
Yeah, they're Pratt & Whitney engines. And while, every aircraft with every aircraft engine manufacturer out there, there are repetitive things that come out of the manufacturer so that operators of the aircraft may have to do certain types of inspections or replace parts. That'll be part of the scrutiny that the NTSB uses when they go through the maintenance records to ensure that all of the applicable service bulletins, airworthiness directives have been complied with for not only the engines, but the airframe itself. That is what makes the aircraft airworthy and in a safe condition for operation. The other thing they'll be looking at is wildlife strikes. In this case, possibly bird strikes. I've done accidents in North Carolina with a business type jet similar to this that struck a deer on the runway, and the airplane, because it breached the fuel tank in the wing, burned the airplane to the ground. So they'll be looking at evidence to see what the nature of the failure or failures were, if in fact this was a loss of an engine. Having an engine failure in an airplane like this is a routine event for pilots because they're trained to handle a routine type engine failure. For whatever reason, you have high oil pressure, loss of fuel flow, and the engine has a problem. You either have a shutdown by itself mechanically or the pilot shuts it down. But the airplane is certified to fly on one engine. The question is going to be, was this of a catastrophic nature that may have breached specific flight controls that may have inhibited the pilot's ability to fly the aircraft? And if you go back to 1989 and you think about United Airlines 232 in Sioux City, where the number 2 engine had a catastrophic failure and it breached the hydraulic system. So now the pilots couldn't manipulate the flight controls. They had to find a creative way to get the airplane on the ground. Not that that happened in this case, but if there was a failure of such catastrophic means that it compromised the flight controls and it inhibited the pilot's ability to maneuver the airplane, that may account for the flight path and why they didn't make it back to the airport.
So just so I'm clear, that plane can fly on one engine as long as the other engine, no matter what happened, didn't create a problem that they could no longer fly the plane. And normally when you have one engine go, you still want to come back and land? Is that the goal?
Yes. Well, anytime you have an engine failure in a twin engine airplane like this, especially right after takeoff, you are not going to continue to destination. The airplane is certified to fly on one engine, but really it's to enable the pilots, if it happens right after takeoff, to get the airplane back to the airport or a suitable airport. It may not be the one they took off out of. They may want to go to an international airport where the runways are longer, things like that. If it happened at high altitude in flight, that enables the pilots then to be able to maneuver the airplane to another airport, diversionary airport. And then on landing, of course, if you lose an engine en route, it will get you to a destination airport. May not be your original destination, but it'll get you to a destination airport.
All right, and those mechanical and maintenance records we don't have access to right now. If you had to have 3 big questions that are on the top of your mind right this minute, what would they be?
1, who was in the front of the airplane? Who was actually manipulating the flight controls at the time of the event and what transpired? 2, what was going on in the aircraft with at least following through with trying to get the airplane back to the airport in an expeditious manner? And 3, what kind of recent maintenance history is there with not only the aircraft itself, but the 2 engines?
You want to say anything else, Greg?
I think right now, a lot of people may be looking at the weather because the weather had degraded. It was a bit foggy and drizzly and that kind of thing, which that doesn't prohibit pilots from flying in those types of conditions as long as minimum conditions are met, because the FAA does require certain operators to have certain weather minimums, that is minimum visibility and minimum ceiling, things like that. As long as these pilots, they were at 2,000 feet, they may not have had the airport in sight until they descended to a low altitude, which again may have contributed to why they didn't make it back to the airport. So weather could be a factor in pilot decision making. So that will be also something that the NTSB will be looking at.
And you're also telling me when they're up in the air, they're taking longer than maybe you'd think they would to get back around to start the descent.
One of the things that as an investigator I always did was put together a timeline when events that I knew that I could actually document with a time hack. I put the timeline together because as a pilot, you don't want to second guess what was going on because we're not in the cockpit. We don't know all of the external factors that are influencing the actions, the inactions, and of course the decision making. But you want to put a timeline together to try and understand, did they take the corrective action in the necessary time? Was it expeditious? Were they evaluating something? Were they continuing to fly to see if they could troubleshoot? So you're trying to put this scenario together to identify why they may not have turned the aircraft immediately back to the airport. They were still heading slightly outbound for some period of time because they may have been troubleshooting, trying to really size up what's the controllability of the airplane, especially if they had a control problem before they, tried to turn around and come back to the airport. So while it's very complex, in the state of accident investigation deals in the details. It is the small things. It is the benign things. It is the little things. It is not big things that usually cause or contribute to accidents. And that's why it's so incumbent on the investigators to get very detailed information so that they can be thorough and methodical in their analysis of what happened, why it happened, and how this airplane could not or did not make it back to the airport.
All right, guys, we're going to have more coverage for you in 2 minutes. We're going to take a quick break, come right back here inside the Impact Studio. We'll see you then. Guys, we do have some breaking information in this situation, this plane crash in Statesville, North Carolina, with Greg Biffle, his wife, and 2 children, and 3 others who were killed as well. We just got a statement within the last hour or so from the town of Mooresville, where we know that Greg Biffle was a community member of. And this says, the mayor, the board of commissioners, and the entire town of Mooresville are deeply saddened to learn about the passing of Greg Biffle and his family. As a philanthropist, community leader, and humanitarian, Greg made an indelible mark and impact that has reached far beyond Mooresville, making it his mission to give his time and talents to make our community a better place. When Hurricane Helene hit western North Carolina, he stepped forward to use his experience to deliver critical supplies and rescue families in distress. As one of NASCAR's greatest drivers, he was recently inducted into the North Carolina Auto Racing Hall of Fame, earning a place on the Walk of Fame right here in downtown Mooresville. Our hearts are with their loved ones as they navigate this tragedy. They did get a picture of the Walk of Fame with Mr. Biffle's picture as well. So So many statements have been not only sent out on social media, but sent to us as well. So many dignitaries, politicians, other drivers, Denny Hamlin, figures and icons of this sport that have just come to this halt, I guess, today because of this news. And in fact, earlier today, we did have another expert talking about this plane crash earlier on our WCNC Plus show today. So we want to go to this interview right now.
Yeah, I want to bring in right now from our sister station out in Phoenix. He's a meteorologist as well, but he's a very skilled pilot. He knows a lot about aviation, did instruction. He's very familiar with these planes. Obviously not going to know a lot about this particular crash, but I wanted to bring in Chris Dunn, the chief meteorologist from our Phoenix 12 station. And Chris, thanks for joining us. And I know you know a lot about the Citation 550 and you're a pilot yourself. Could you tell like our viewers watching online a little bit about like what is going through a pilot's mind when they're taking off and they report engine trouble? What's the process that they would be going through to maybe get back to the airport, or how does that work from a pilot standpoint?
Well, thanks for having me on, Brad. The first process is you want to deal with the emergency, and all pilots, no matter the skill level or the certification level, you're taught to deal with an engine out, whether it's if you have 1 or 2 or 4 engines on the airplane. So you deal with the emergency, and the first rule of any emergency in aviation is fly the airplane. Now, I was looking at some of the observations in that area, and they probably were in the clouds at that point, or maybe not, but pretty close to being in the clouds. So that adds an extra dimension. Not only are you trying to deal with an airplane that may not be functioning properly, but you also have the fact that you can't see outside, which in a normally functioning airplane is perfectly fine. And we're not sure, or at least I have not seen from some of the reports, if they have checked on with air traffic control at that point, because Statesville is a non-tower controlled airport, which is fine. You just do self-announces. But if you're flying IFR or instrument flight rules into the clouds, you are given a release time, you take off, and then you check in with air traffic control. I don't know if they had an opportunity to do just that, but obviously there was some sort of a problem where they took off and they made an immediate left-hand turn coming back to the airport, trying to get back on the ground. So if there was some sort of an engine problem or an engine failure, the first thing you want to do is secure the engine and try to keep the aircraft under control, and then try to get it back down on the ground as quickly as possible.
So if you lose one engine, obviously this plane can fly with one engine. We heard from another expert that it technically could fly with no engines for a while at altitude, obviously. What is the biggest problem with flying with one engine? Let's say one's completely out and you're coming in for landing. What are some of the pitfalls that a pilot might have to deal with as they're coming in for an emergency landing, which this would be, right?
Yeah, certainly it can fly on one engine because it has 2. The biggest challenge, if you will, is something called asymmetrical thrust. So if you think about it, you have 2 engines, and if you lose one, the other one is going to cause it to yaw or shift over to one side. So you have to account for that. And a lot of the multi-engine training, the curriculum, is based on what happens if you do lose an engine, and how are you going to treat that emergency. You need to shut down the one inoperative engine and then be able to control the airplane flying on one engine. So there are a lot of procedures that you have to do, and then flying an instrument approach on a single engine in a multi-engine aircraft, that's a big part of training and the recurrent training as well. So there's a lot of emphasis put into that in the training environment on operating on just one engine in a multi-engine aircraft. So the flight crew, don't know if there was 1 or 2. I believe the Citation 550 is certified for single pilot operations, but a lot of these operators do operate with 2 pilots up front, and that just adds an extra layer of safety. We don't know exactly the nature of the accident and the crash and the situation, and of course in the coming days we'll find out more, we'll learn more about exactly what happened. But typically flight crews at that level are very well trained to handle a situation like that. But as I said, you have layers of different things that are going on at the same time, and that can make it extra difficult to deal with a situation like that.
So, Chris, I mean, they took off. You said it's an untowered airport. With Statesville Airport's pretty small for most airport standards, but a lot of commercial, I would say commercial, but private jets fly out of there because of the NASCAR teams. Would there be a reason for them to go back to that airport or try to go to another airport? The fact that this happened so quickly, was that just the best place to go right after they reported the trouble they had?
Yeah, and if they were, their mindset was, we got to get this on the ground right now. We just left a perfectly good airport right behind us. Let's do a U-turn and get right back down on the ground. If they had everything under control and things were stabilized, they could declare a May Day and try to get back into Douglas, the big airport with a lot more facilities and a lot more emergency response there. But I think their mindset was, we got to get this on the ground. We got to get it on the ground now. We just left an airport behind us. Let's turn back around and get back down on the ground. Again, I can't put my mind in the minds of the pilots on that airplane, but that would be my first guess as to why they turned back around and try to get back down to the ground in Statesville.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Chris. One last question before we let you go. I really appreciate you taking this time, and I'm glad you're giving us this input, that we don't know a lot of the information, but from an aircraft standpoint, you're familiar with this aircraft. What can you tell us about this specific aircraft? What is its typical usage, passenger load, those kind of things? What would this aircraft normally be used for?
Yeah, exactly what they were using it for. Executive transport, business aviation, the Citation 2, the line, the 525, 550, to be a little more technical. Very popular business jet. This one, I looked up the number. I think it was manufactured in 1981, which is not a big deal. You think a 1981 car, wow, that's really old. But for an aircraft, not so much, because every airplane in the U.S., in order to legally fly, they have to undergo an annual inspection. That doesn't that goes for the airliners, business jets, even the small trainers. Everything has to be inspected annually. And in addition, those inspections are much more in depth on a jet aircraft. And then the insurance requirements are usually pretty high. So you're dealing with a lot of levels and a lot of layers of certification, of the training of the aircraft. Typically, the aircraft, 6 to 8 people on board, and you can do 1,500-mile legs, 2,000-mile legs. So say from Charlotte to New York, that's an easy hop. Charlotte to Miami, Florida. My understanding was this was heading down to Florida and then out to the Bahamas. A pretty common mission for this aircraft. So they are used for personal transport, for business transportation, and Statesville is perfectly fine to use that airport. 7,000-foot runway, plenty of runway length, and they're just outside of the busy, what's called the Class Bravo airspace in Charlotte, which is a highly restricted zone of airspace. So they can take off and they can land. They don't have to even talk to anybody in air traffic control, unless they're flying into the clouds and on an IFR flight plan, which they most likely were, and aircraft like this typically are. So once they get in the clouds and they check in with Charlotte approach, and then they're handed off to Washington, D.C. Center or Jacksonville Center or something like that. And so the different layers of air traffic control will handle them. But again, it's really early in the process, and we're trying to just look at some of the details and pick apart what went on, and I'm sure a lot of those questions will be answered in the coming days. And unfortunately, to hear the news that you had in the breaking news at the top of this cut-in, an unfortunate end to this crash.
Yeah, it is, and that really, at the end of the day, is the tragedy of this all, is that we lost lives over this. Chris Dunn, thank you so much for your expertise. Really appreciate that, and thank you so much for checking in. We might hit you up again at some other time.
All right, thanks, Brad.
All right, folks, we've had some really good interviews over the last 40 minutes or so with experts giving us a little bit of background and perspective. Obviously, there's a lot of preliminary information into this that the FAA has to let us know. And in fact, there is a press conference scheduled for tomorrow. Still awaiting a time for that. But we're going to take a quick 2-minute break, come back with another expert, a new interview from our Danielle Stein, more on Greg Biffle's life and who he was and what he meant to not only NASCAR, but to folks all across the community. We'll see you in 2 minutes. Well, thanks for coming back with us here on WCNC Plus. We're going to continue with this tragic day, at least as what we know of course, this plane crashing in Statesville. Aboard it was Greg Biffle, his wife, 2 children, and 3 other individuals that we are still getting more information on. So a total of 7 individuals died in this plane crash. And you can't go many places within the NASCAR Hall of Fame without seeing Greg Biffle's name in a lot of different places, because he was a great driver, so, in the top 75 greatest drivers of NASCAR as well. So we did speak to one of the lead people at the museum in Uptown right now, and Danielle Stein just had this interview. So we'll go to this, as this is new right now for you, playing on WCNC Plus.
This has been a very hard day for the sports community at large, but specifically those involved in NASCAR. Executive Director of the NASCAR Hall of Fame, Winston Kelly. I mean, if you're able to just explain from your perspective what this loss, just on a first page, I guess, means to the sport as a whole right now.
Well, I don't think devastating is a strong enough word, but I don't have enough command of the English language to come up with what it is. It's devastating, heartbreaking. I think we're all numb. And NASCAR is very much a family. And at times like this, you realize how important that family is. And all 7 people on that plane are part of that family in some way or another. And while there will be most of the conversation about Greg Biffle, who was a superstar athlete, but he was a superstar human being, as was his wife, Christina. And we certainly remember his daughter, Emma, son, Ryder, as well as the Duttons, Dennis, and his son Jack, and Greg Wadsworth, who was a part of the NASCAR community. So, it's overwhelming, but we want to remember the quality people that they were.
Yeah, it seems like that is by far and large the impact that he's made on so many, is just the person he was and how many lives he touched. Do you have any anecdotes or memories that you can share that maybe you experienced with him that kind of paint the picture of who Greg was?
Well, I think what people are rightfully talking about is how he came to the rescue of so many following Hurricane Helene. And he didn't just send money or pass out water bottles. He got in his helicopter with his money and flew into very challenging areas. And that's just an example of the type of person that he was. He was always approachable, as I was a member of the media. And Christina, his wife, participated in many of our fundraisers for the NASCAR Hall of Fame Foundation that helps children most in need. And she did our Over the Edge, rappelling down the side of a building, and raised money to do that. So that, just the quality of people that they were. And I've heard a lot of people call into the NASCAR radio channel who were fans, who had the pleasure of meeting him, and reminded people he always took that 15, 20, 30 seconds to sign an autograph, take a picture. The stats you can read about. If you're a nominee into the NASCAR Hall of Fame and one of NASCAR's 75 greatest drivers, you are among the elite athletes. But he and Christina were elite people, and I did not know the Duttons or Craig as well, or not at all to some extent with the Duttons, but I hear the same thing about them. So it's the quality of the people that resonates with me so much.
Yeah, it's a rarity to find someone to be so excelling in sport, but also to be such an exceptional just human being. Just seeing the outpouring of support from fellow drivers, from some of the greats in the sport as well. What has it just been like from your perspective? Like you said, the NASCAR world is a family, and it's been one that's been touched by tragedies before. So to see people coming together right now and, remembering Greg and his life and legacy, what does that look like from your perspective as well?
Well, I think it reminds us of the tragedies that we've had, be it 30 years ago or 20 years ago, that this family always comes together and supports each other. While competitors on a racetrack or on any sports field, but on a racetrack where it's so intense, they may have their difference of opinions, but they quickly realize how insignificant that was. One driver that he had a run in with, 20 years ago at Watkins Glen, Boris said, called into a local show recently and was just talking about how they had become friends. And I think that's one of the things you see in our sport and probably in other sports too, that just rallying around each other and realizing how blessed we are to have had them in our life. And, when people are as young as Greg and his family and the Duttons and Wadsworth are so young, it even amplifies the grief, I think, because there's so much that they have given and left to give. And, on earth, we don't understand why these things happen. And, maybe in an afterlife we will, but, it's just devastating, but we've got to remember what they have done, not what they have done in a sport or business, but what they have done for people. And these folks certainly exemplify that.
In the sport, though, as you mentioned, he is one of the greats, named one of the 75 greatest. His career spanning 3 decades. Are you able to, though, speak a little bit about what kind of driver he was, who he was when he was getting in a car, and what kind of energy and persona he maybe took on that made him as successful as he did throughout his career?
Well, he was very focused, and most any driver that gets to the cup level is incredibly focused on what they're doing. But he also won on all different types of tracks. He was very versatile. He was quickly very successful, winning the Craftsman Truck Series championship in 2000. 2 years later, the Busch Series, now O'Reilly Auto Parts Series championship, coming very close in 2005 to be the first to win at all 3 national levels. And he won at some of NASCAR's toughest tracks like Darlington and Daytona. So he was focused, he was determined, he was a hard racer, but he was a fair racer. And could drive anything, any type of car. He did a lot of off-road racing after he got out of NASCAR, but he came back after he'd been retired a number of years and won a Truck Series race at Texas. Still incredibly fit. Saw him a couple of weeks ago at it's actually an autograph session that was a fundraiser. Just 2 weeks ago, he and Christina were both there, still giving back. But he was focused, but he was fair and a hard-nosed racer in the best of ways.
Was that the last time that you saw him or spoke with him that you were just describing, that autograph session?
Yes. It was literally 2 weeks ago at an autograph session in Mooresville that also raises money for a children's cause that several people, probably, 75, 80 people signing autographs, and he being one of them.
Wow, that's amazing. I know he was a nominee on the Modern ballot this year once again. I know it's obviously been a little soon since the news has all happened, but from your side, from the Hall of Fame, I'm sure there could be some plans maybe moving forward to enshrine him. Are there any details or any plans as of right now that you have for wanting to make sure his legacy lives on in the Hall of Fame?
Well, we will acknowledge it. We don't make early enshrinements, and I don't think anybody would want that, even in their memory. And, as a nominee, in my opinion, it's not a matter of if he goes into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. It's when he goes into the NASCAR Hall of Fame. And as a nominee, he's already acknowledged, but there will be a number of things that we will do on our exterior video board, our fan billboard inside the hall, acknowledging it as you go into the Hall of Honor, where inductees and nominees are recognized, and call that to people's attention. And like I said, I think it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when as a nominee.
All right, guys. Now, our Miles Harris, obviously we had many of our reporters on this story from different angles, but Miles was tasked with trying to find some neighbors and individuals in the area who may have seen or witnessed something. And in fact, we did get some ring video thanks to those individuals who live close to the airport that gave us that fiery footage, which you will be seeing tonight on our news at 11. But let's go to this, a string of sound bites from our Miles Harris from individuals who live up in Statesville.
Hearing the news about Greg Biffle, when you first kind of heard that, what was your initial reaction, Rachel?
Just shocked. Just did not unexpected. I follow him and Cletus McFarland on all the race channels and different news medias and different things, and followed them when they did the Hurricane Helene help, and just I'm in shock, just surprised, and it's just heartbreaking for his family, especially this time of year, and being Christmas and living right here, just your neighbors, your people. We didn't know him, per se, but just seeing the family, hearing about it, it hurts. It's a shock.
Right, and it hits close to home, right? You're a mother, right? You have kids, and so when you kind of again feel that, know that, what's that kind of feeling like as that neighbor too? I mean,
it blows you away. It's unexpected, and I have a daughter that's flying back today from Palm Beach into Charlotte, and then I'm flying out with my family on Monday to go to Key West, and I'm just it's unexpected, scary, just to think this could just happen in the blink of an eye. I don't know.
Now you mentioned some of the efforts that he's done with Western North Carolina, but at least some of the words that you've heard that he has made and the impact in your community, what has that really been? Or
it's shocking. I mean, he's done a lot lately, and he's really been around in the news, and I kind of resurfaced again, I guess, and just surprised to hear it and unexpected, and I don't know, what should I say?
No, you're fine. You're fine. It's just, again, it hits in a lot of different areas, like you said.
It does.
Right?
Yeah. Totally unexpected, and it just hurts for the family. I feel for everybody involved, and the family and the friends and the neighbors and everybody around. So.
All right, guys, we also do want to play another aviation expert discussing a little bit about what could have gone wrong and how this make and model could have contributed to this crash. We've been hearing about how this plane, which was a Cessna-made Citation business jet, was made in the 1980s, which is really not an old aircraft, although it was made, more than 40 years ago. So let's listen in on this expert interview as well.
And I believe we have an aviation attorney ready to talk who has worked with some of these planes before. I believe, is that all good to go, Carlene? Right. All right, so I believe we have aviation attorney Pablo Rojas here. Thank you so much for joining us on such short notice. I know that this is, unfortunately, in your line of work, not an unfamiliar scenario, and it's still preliminary in terms of the information that we have. But I would love to get just your initial thoughts, how you learned about this, and what are your first thoughts after hearing about this?
Sure, and I think Brad hit on a lot of the most important facts that, or seemingly facts that we know so far. I learned about it on the news, maybe like anybody else on the internet. We're based in Miami, but we represent victims nationwide. And once I learned about a plane crash like this is our line of work. We represent victims of plane crashes, and I dug in to learn as much as we can. As you folks were just talking about, we don't know very much right now, but I think Brad nailed it. The flight path that we know so far, the quickness with which the pilots evidently made a decision to turn around and attempt to land again clearly indicates some kind of mechanical issue. Very commonly, when pilots detect an issue with an engine, they detect it right away after takeoff. Takeoff and landing are the two most dangerous parts of any flight. And, any kind of mechanical issue could prompt a pilot to say, wait a minute, we gotta get back to land. This is not safe to continue this flight. But very, very commonly, it's an engine. Now, twin engine aircraft, as Brad was just saying, they can fly with just one. Really, you can fly with zero if you have enough speed and you can get aerodynamic lift. But it is more challenging. And as Brad was just saying, I completely agree. I think the fact that there are tree debris and they didn't make it to the runway suggests that they were losing quite a good deal of power. So we could be thinking about issues with one engine. We could be looking at issues potentially with both, because you should be able to land an aircraft like this running on one engine if everything else is going well.
Yeah, and for non-aviation experts, I'm sure that's actually probably pretty shocking to hear. We do know that they were not in the air for very long, as you mentioned. I believe only about 10 minutes from the latest that we heard from officials, them crashing at around 10:15 this morning, and the FAA already on scene investigating. Now, I know, as I mentioned, this is not unfamiliar in your line of work. This particular plane, the Cessna C550, is this one that you have experience with in the past?
Yeah, Cessna's a very big manufacturer of aircraft. Maybe a lot of your viewers or listeners would have heard of it. And the Citation is their business jets. It's sort of a fancier aircraft. There are different models of Citations. And over the years, like many other aircraft, there have been issues reported. There have been fatal crashes. There have been issues reported in the past related to landing gear. But at this early stage, as you say, the FAA and NTSB are on the ground, if not already, very, very soon. They're going to take exclusive jurisdiction over the wreckage. They're going to conduct the investigation, and hopefully, because I think the families of victims, and from what I've seen on social media, unfortunately, there will be probably several fatalities. They're going to want answers quickly about who was on the flight and what the NTSB has come across. At first glance, it doesn't look like a landing gear issue because, as Brad was just explaining, they didn't even make it to the runway. I mean, this was a loss of power. So sometimes the information from prior crashes is helpful. Other times you have to wonder whether there's something else going on here that doesn't have to do necessarily with these planes. The other thing I would mention is, engines on aircraft are to some extent interchangeable. So we're looking at obviously a Cessna Citation jet, but if there was a loss of power issue with one or both of the engines, then one thing to look at is what was the make and model of the engine, which comes from a variety of manufacturers. I think once that information is obtained, I haven't seen it, perhaps other folks have been able to get it in the short time since this crash. One thing that will be important to look at is what is the history of incidents involving that type of engine, not necessarily that type of plane.
That's really helpful information too, because I know when we first got this and we were looking up the Citation and what we know, I know there's multiple configurations and slightly different models. Originally, we were just trying to figure out how many people were on board, and I'm curious if you are able to know that based on the information you have with how many seats there are. But I think that's helpful for people to know too, is that there's multiple things here. It could be different engines, different models that could also impact the situation.
Absolutely. One of the things we often say when talking about these types of tragedies is that typically it's not enough for one thing to go wrong. Several things have to go wrong for something like this to happen. And both aircraft and engine, meaning the body, the fuselage, but then each of the two engines undergo incredibly intensive and frequent maintenance. At least they're supposed to under federal regulations. So there will have been a lot of people that laid hands on this aircraft and engines over the past several months and years, every 100 hours, every year, at different maintenance intervals. And so it's very complex situation technically. I think the NTSB and FAA will get at some initial impression of what went wrong. As Brad was saying, at first glance, it has something to do with the engines. But then I think you'd be looking at questions not only of the design of the aircraft and the design of the engines, but also the maintenance history. Aircraft and engines both are supposed to have very well documented maintenance histories. And one of the first things the FAA and NTSB, and if other folks eventually get involved, lawyers such as ourselves for victims or any other investigators, they're going to be taking a long, hard look at the maintenance history of whether the aircraft and engines were up to speed with the maintenance that was supposed to be performed, and also whether previous maintenance issues or mishaps had been reported. Sometimes when engines fail, there will be a report that a pilot noticed something that a couple flights ago or a couple months ago that luckily didn't lead to a fatality, and maybe somebody looked at it and signed off on it. Maybe they should have, maybe they shouldn't have. But that type of historical record of previously reported incidents and what type of maintenance was performed is going to be critical in getting answers and getting to the truth of what happened here.
Such helpful information, Pablo. Before we let you go, because I know this is a very busy day and this is just breaking as it's happening, is there anything else we haven't asked about you want people to know?
No, not at all. I think you guys have hit the right points, hit the right questions, and our hearts go out to the victims' families. We deal with this all the time. It's a terrible, terrible thing to happen. This looks like a terrible crash with several fatalities. So I would just close on that note. This is a terrible crash.
Yeah, absolutely heartbreaking, and I appreciate you again taking the time to break this down. I know people appreciate it, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, folks, we're going to take another 2-minute break here, and we will come back. We've got more coverage for you here in our 8 o'clock hour. We'll see you in 2. All right, everybody, we're now into our 8 o'clock hour, and in fact, the first meeting of the Transit Authority just happened tonight, so they took roll call. We're going to jump into the meeting a little bit into this couple of minutes, maybe 10 to 15, as they discuss the PAVE Act, which is that 1 cent sales tax that's going to fund road and bridge projects around the area. So let's go to this right now.
I'm Catherine Clodfelter. I'm an attorney at Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein. I am one of the numerous consultants whose brains and experts went into the report that you have before you, and I am here to discuss with you about the report. I'll do a little bit of the background, a little bit of just getting on the same page, and talk to you about why I am sitting here talking to you. And then I want to go into 2 summaries. As you can see and probably know from what you read, the studies are split into 5 different sections. I'm going to skip right to, in my summary, section 5, because I think it's the analysis of all the other sections, and it's probably the one you are thinking about the most. But I do want to give you a summary of the flow, the rhythm and rhyme of sections 1 through 4, because they are largely similar in how they come out, and it will give you a bit of a understanding of the path before you, I hope. So To start, I also want to acknowledge that I am joined by Scott Leo and Jorge Luna, again, two of the consultants in the group. Parker, Poe, Adams, and Bernstein was the law firm involved, and VHB is a team of engineers who are also involved. To get on the same page, you all, of course, know that the PAVE Act began this whole process and set out requirements that the authority undertake studies of 5 definite sections, one that was at the discretion of the authority. So I'll talk through what those 5 are just to make sure we're on the same page. The authority was to study by January 1st, 2026, the legal and financial considerations of 1, a transfer of assets from CATS to the new authority, 2, outstanding debt that the CAT system has, that the public transportation system has. The third being intergovernmental agreements. You'll note that that is intergovernmental, so there are private agreements that are out there that this study doesn't mention or contain. And the fourth was the study of a transfer of employees, HR. So those are the first 4. The 5th, using the words straight out of the PAVE Act, was to be a recommendation as to whether a transfer of assets, liabilities, and operations was feasible and advisable. And I will say, so you understand, when we say advisable, we are not talking in a policy sense. Our consultants took that to mean the PAVE Act asking, are there any insurmountable barriers, obstacles to a transfer so that it would be not advisable to do what's set out in law? So answering 2 negatives in the positive, we are discussing whether it is advisable. I'll go back and start at the beginning of why I'm here talking to you. Again, as you can appreciate, given that it's December 18th and the study is due on the desk of certain other parties by January 1st, there was a very limited time to be able to accomplish what this body needs to accomplish. The Metropolitan Transit Commission directed the city to move forward with the study so that this body would start on the right foot on day 1 and get the information that you need to move forward. So consultants were engaged to perform the study that sits before you. How did we do what we did? We, again, with the limited time, took this as an opportunity to seek comprehensive but certainly not exhaustive information about the transfer. So imagine the amount of documents that are related to the assets, and you don't just have to imagine, you will come to find out, related to the assets, the number of intergovernmental agreements, the number of debt instruments, and then, of course, the HR aspect of all of this. For each of those studies, the team asked for, again, comprehensive data from the city, from CATS or other departments to be able to look through and better understand not just a system in general of transfer, but issues unique to CATS. Once we gathered that data, which is all set out in each section within the report you have before you, we then went to okay, what are the legal and financial considerations that will have to be dealt with in order for a transfer to take place? The legal and financial considerations are also by no means exhaustive. There will be things that come up that are not listed in the study. The study is not meant to be comprehensive. It is not, exhaustive. It is meant to lay out an issue spot to know whether or not this is all feasible and to give some information so when you start on day 1, again, this is sort of the ground zero. When you start on day 1, you have some information to work with. That leads me to what this study is and what it isn't. This study is not a binding path of what the authority will do. It is not telling you here are the things that must be done or the way in which they must be done. It is at its most useful, high-level issue spotting, those considerations, to try and give the information that's going to be needed to take the first actions. It is, like I said, a general idea of the things that will happen as you set up a public body. So both the practical as well as some of the timeline considerations. A lot of what is before you as a body involves the practical reality of setting up a public body. There are both legal and practical requirements that are set both in the PAVE Act and by other law that the PAVE Act refers to that will guide and sometimes influence greatly the decisions and the timeline before you. So a good amount of the considerations really depend on the timeline, the practical nature of what you're doing, and the legal structure that the PAVE Act sets out for the public body. What it is not, again, is legal advice. So we are a team of lawyers who were here to make sure that the legal considerations were set out as we saw them. But again, with the practical, with the necessity for day one, there will probably be a team of professionals who you hire to help you undertake setting up a public body and going through all the actions that are required under the PAVE Act for the transfer of assets, liabilities, and operations. All right, so now that I've taken you through who I am, what this is, what this isn't, I'll go ahead to the meat, which is study item 5, right? A recommendation as to whether this is feasible and advisable. And by this, I mean only looking at a transfer of assets, liabilities, and operations. Yes, it is feasible. You are a public body. And as a public body, the authority and the city can do the main issues that are going to arise in a transfer of assets and operations. And let me talk through those two things just a little bit. The biggest hurdles out there, both on a legal and practical stage, are that there is existing debt associated with the CAT system. That debt cannot transfer. That debt cannot transfer. I'll say that again. There is also collateral that exists to secure that debt. So either collateral that was purchased with that debt or otherwise identified with the debt instrument, and the debt instrument says, in other words, the agreement that was entered into in order to take out the debt, that says you cannot transfer an item of collateral while it is securing the debt. So on day one, no matter what the PAVE Act says about transition timeline, there will be some collateral, some assets that cannot transfer. The good part of being a public body and under the PAVE Act is that this authority has the ability to enter into what's known as interlocal agreements. It's under the interlocal cooperation statute. That will allow the authority and the city to undertake a time of use and operation of the public transit system that exists while some assets remain with the city, with the debt, and while some assets are able to transfer and operations able to transfer. So you have those tools as not only a public body, but importantly because the PAVE Act says you do. And so it is feasible to get over that hurdle of the debt remaining in place. The other practical hurdle to think through, again, and I've said this before and I can't say it enough, is the amount of work that's really necessary just to set up a public body. That work also has to be somewhat duplicated in order to have employees. As you can all appreciate, there are certain HR policies, benefits, et cetera, that must be in place in order to have employees covered by those policies. Right, so the PAVE Act does require the entrance into the local government employees retirement system. There are other benefits that are currently offered by CATS, by the city to CATS personnel, that this authority will want to consider whether or not to also provide to employees. So that the act of doing that simply takes time, and that's just a practical issue. Fortunately, there are a lot of companies that do this all the time and some local governments. So there are methods out there to help in a transition period, whatever you determine the transition period to be. And so in looking at that, we were able to say, despite these large hurdles, there are tools out there, things that are set up and in place so that you all can achieve them. I've said all these things a little bit squishy because, again, one of the main thing is timeline drivers, and a lot of the timeline will be decided by the authority on day one. These are not things that the study sets out. Timeline is not something that the study says this is when it must happen. It is something that the PAVE Act does drive somewhat. So in setting up all of these, important things to think through are the timeline under which a public body needs to be set up, and a timeline under which all of the transfer needs to start occurring. So again, the PAVE Act, realizing that debt cannot transfer, that certain assets won't be able to transfer on day one when other assets transfer, recognize that there will be a period of time and that there are agreements that will need to be entered into in order to make that achievable. So that's the feasibility element and aspect. I've hit high-level description of the hurdles. Again, the second part of that is, of course, is it not advisable? And the answer to us with the tools that the authority has in place, as we set out in the study, is that no, it is not advisable. So therefore, it is advisable to make a transfer. Not a policy, a discussion, but simply an analysis of whether or not there are possible pathways to achieve what you're required to do under the PAVE Act. Of course, I say possible pathways, again, because while the study might discuss some of those pathways so that it's clear to the reader they've been determined and dissected, they are not the required pathways. All of this can be done and will be done however the authority decides to do it. So that's the summary of feasible and advisable. That is study item 5. I'll go back now to study items 1 through 4 and give you just a summary again of how this sort of rhythm plays out based on the timeline issues I've also talked about already. Assets, as you know, that are covered with debt or are collateral for debt cannot transfer. The debt cannot transfer. And so while there might be a start date to a transfer is a period, not a point in time. But I've not actually said what assets are transferring. The PAVE Act doesn't actually say what assets are transferring. It says the CATS assets. And there's nothing in this study that says what is and what isn't. In fact, there is a good amount of work that it will take to determine the assets that are collateral, and the other restrictions that are on the assets. That's a fair amount of detailed time needed and a determination. Some of that will be set out in all information that CATS has, and we have verified that CATS has all of that information. And some of that will be negotiation that you all start on day 1. Again, this is week 0. So the real first task is identifying and getting your hands around the transfer itself. Beyond that, understanding the restrictions on what's transferring and how the authority will work with, enter interlocal agreements with the city or other entities in order to make that transition happen, right? To operate the assets that aren't transferring, to agree on things like how liabilities will be handled, to agree on who will keep the insurance, all of those details. That's sort of a second phase. Then you get to the actual discussion of and implementation of that. Again, there'll be a timeline that you all will negotiate and think about and talk about. Setting that timeline is not in the study. There are some requirements in the PAVE Act, but they're really just beginning dates. So there'll be a period of transfer that this body will need to determine based on the assets and the restrictions on the assets and the operations. Following that, there might be a period of time in which some assets that are used for public transportation don't transfer, or some assets that are transferring are also used for other public benefit. And so it's most likely, though everything is still up to the authority and the study doesn't say it has to happen, but there's most likely going to be a time period in which after a transfer, there's still a lot of coordination and collaboration between the local governments to run for assets that have not transferred or that have some other public use. I'd say general summary then of the rhythm of assets, that plays out for each of the studies. You'll have that same situation when it comes to intergovernmental agreements. You've got to identify them. You've got to figure.
Folks, that was our MPTA meeting. We're going to take a quick 2-minute break, and we'll come back because we have a huge Panthers game this week, obviously with the Buccaneers, and we've got a special coming up tonight at 9, so we're going to get more into the Panthers, and, of course, our special as we get ready for the weekend. We'll see you in 2 minutes. All right, guys, welcome back. As I said, Panthers have a huge game as the path to the playoffs first starts with this weekend, and the Buccaneers got to sweep the Buccaneers, though, to make and clinch the division. So let's go to Panthers on the Plus with Nick Carboni right now.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Panthers on the Plus. I'm your host, WCNC Charlotte Sports Director Nick Carboni, and we are giving you Panthers Bucks preview coverage every single night of the week ahead of this pivotal division game that really is for the Panthers season coming up Sunday at Bank of America Stadium. Joining me tonight is WCNC Charlotte News and Sports reporter Miles Harris, who, fortunately for me, we had Miles available to fill in when I was on paternity leave earlier this season, and I sat at home and watched the team go on its only winning streak of the year. It looked like a lot of fun. There has been a couple of fun weeks since I've come back. Miles, what was your record as a Panthers
They
reporter?
were above 500, I'll put it that way. And it's like Christmas came early. I get a chance to talk ball with you today, man, so it's awesome.
I won't give anybody what my record is overall here in Carolina, getting here in 2016. But here we are. I mean, late December, holiday season. Here come the Panthers, at least in the conversation, very much in it. Took themselves out of how much they could be in it with that loss to the Saints. I mean, just as an observer and somebody who covers just this town in general, what did you kind of feel when the Panthers went down to the Superdome and kind of blew that opportunity?
Laid a bit of an egg. It's kind of one of those things that I feel like has been like the tale of the season this year. I feel like this is at least the second or third time where they've been favorited, or at least from the Vegas odds of things, favorited, and they just fall short. And so it's kind of wild because we talked about it a little bit earlier, though, too, but like we just don't really know what to expect with this team, and it's wild to say that they're also in a possible playoff contention situation right now as well. looking at the game as itself, I mean, it's like kind of one of those things. It's like, what's the defense's identity? What's the offense's identity? How do they want to kind of move things? And so I know that at one point when Rico Dowdle was hot, they were like, okay, this is a running team, right? We're able to kind of ride that back. But I think one of the things that they struggle with, especially against New Orleans this season, is that New Orleans has been able to eliminate the run game. So when they eliminate the run game, it's just now in the hands of Bryce Young. And I don't know if, I'm going to sound really critical right now, I don't know if that's if Dave Canales has the full confidence in Bryce, if the offense is supposed to be the way it's supposed to be, but they're just not really hitting and putting up points. I mean, I'm looking at their schedule throughout the season. There's only been a handful of times where they even put up more than 17 points, and so that's kind of the concern looking at going into now this game where they face Tampa Bay. There's a lot of similarities to what New Orleans does defensively that Tampa Bay does well as well, so it's like one of those things where like, will we see a repeat of what we just saw last Sunday at home in the bank against the Buccaneers?
It's funny to hear you say trying to figure out their identity, try to figure out this team, because I listen to all these national podcasts every week that are previewing Panthers games and whoever they're playing, and the last couple of weeks they've just been like, let's throw our stuff in the air. We have no idea what this team is going to do next, and they're a 500 team. They have an imperfectly even record at 7-7, and 500 teams by nature are inconsistent. But if you look at the volatility of the Panthers season, I mean, you go into Green Bay when the Packers were basically the favorite front runner in the NFC, and you somehow pull off a victory. You come home the next week, and because of what New Orleans did defensively, as you mentioned, you lose to the Saints and lay an egg. Then the next week you go and you sweep the Atlanta Falcons, I believe was the next game, and you light up the scoreboard, win in great fashion, and then the next week you just lay another egg on Monday Night Football against the 49ers, and then the next week the Rams are in town, and everybody's like, okay, well, there's no way they're going to do that again. And they score 31 points against the LA Rams. So, but you said the key word in there, identity. And when Dave Canales was asked this week, what is it going to take for consistency for this team, he just mentioned identity. And I don't think it's all that surprising that a young team with a second-year head coach who's in his third year of play calling in general, has been up and down and trying to find that identity. There have just been so many frustrating moments where it seems like the obvious call at San Francisco on 1st and goal is to run, and they don't. It seems like you could get creative on 4th and a third of a yard at New Orleans the other day, and you're not going to sneak Bryce Young, but that doesn't mean you have to run it right into the teeth of that Saints defense who's taken it away, and that's exactly what they do. So there have been those frustrating, obvious moments from an identity standpoint that you're like, why can't they all put it together on the same day? We saw against LA when Dave Canales is at his best and Bryce Young is at his best on the same day, they can beat anybody.
They can beat a lot of good
NFL.
teams. Right. And I think the thing that has worked out in their favor at so far this season is that they have been able to kind of be unpredictable, right? Like we have seen ways, even with Bryce Young in particular, like 4th down, game on the line, he's been able to be clutch in that sense. And I think that also kind of falls into the line of them being a little bit unpredictable in a sense. And again, it works out for them against the big teams like you mentioned, against the Green Bay Packers, even against the Dallas Cowboys, even against the Rams on Thanksgiving weekend, right? But it doesn't always work consistently. And so like you said, not being able to find their identity on both sides of the ball. I know we talk a lot about the offense, but the defense as well. Yeah. I literally ran into Eugene earlier, and we talked about it. Those 3 takeaways that they could have had in the New Orleans game, how much of a difference that makes and how much that shifts the momentum in the favor of the Panthers. And he said the reaction that he saw on the field was, it was like, I'll get the next one. Well, in the NFL, there may not be a next one. And so there's that level of urgency that kind of needs to be pushed a little bit, though, too. And it's not saying that that's not being identified by coaches or by the players, but you're just not seeing that enough on the field. And I think that kind of falls in line with the inconsistency and really just, again, not being able to find that identity on both sides of the ball. And so now we go into this game where even Tampa Bay is kind of being a little bit unpredictable and inconsistent as well. They looked hot. Baker Mayfield at the beginning of the season was in that MVP conversation, but now they're kind of falling a little short as well. They've had their struggles against another foe like the Atlanta Falcons as well. So it's just a lot of questions for both teams heading into this game. But again, it's kind of wild that we're still not sure the identity when we're talking about a team that has the potential to go into the playoffs.
Yeah, well, I think they found the identity on both sides in that Rams game, and then they're just not able to repeat it week to week. They're just not mature enough as a team at this point, professional enough, and those aren't knocks, those are words that Dave Canales has used. These guys are young and they're new to each other and everything. They haven't learned to win as a team yet, or to put it together every single Sunday or sometimes Monday out of the gate. So I think that has been a growing pain that Panthers fans who probably didn't expect the team to be in this position at this point, now that they are, expect them to take care of business when it looks like a team is supposed to take care of business, and that's just not what they do. But they're due for a bounce back. And, you mentioned the Bucs stopping the run the way they do and kind of similar to the Saints. Man, did we see against Atlanta last Thursday night that they have some real issues on the back end of their defense. And that's where I think Dave Canales, you talk about should they trust Bryce Young and put the ball in his hands. This is one of those instances where he has to. I don't think he always wants to. Sometimes I think he wants to show that he trusts Bryce Young too much in situations where he shouldn't. But I think there are situations where he just doesn't trust him enough when he should. And I think he absolutely has to take shots this week, go for it on fourth down, which obviously hasn't been a problem, but be creative. And this is a matchup that you can exploit on the defensive side of the football against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Because listen, as much as the Bucs might be buoyed by the fact that the Panthers blew that opportunity in New Orleans, they're on a massive backslide. They have lost 6 of 8. We had a guest on this week that said it's bad. The feelings right now are bad. So the Bucs approach is we're ticked off and we got to take back what's ours. The Panthers approach is, hey, if we can just get back to what we did against the Rams in late November, we can rattle off 2 out of 3. So we're going to have much more with Miles Harris. We're going to preview this Panthers-Bucs matchup and talk about good old Baker Mayfield back in the building coming up here on Panthers on the Plus. Welcome back to Panthers on the Plus. I'm your host, WCNC Charlotte Sports Director Nick Carboni, talking Panthers, Bucs with WCNC Charlotte news and sports reporter Miles Harris. Miles, it's an interesting 3-game stretch for the Panthers for obvious reasons, playoff implications and such, but you look at the quarterbacks on the field facing the Panthers are, they could end up being ghosts of seasons past around Christmas for Carolina. You've got Baker Mayfield twice. You've got Sam Darnold right there in the middle. And, oh, by the way, God forbid anything should happen to Baker, they're going to trot Teddy Bridgewater back on the field who played here in 2020. So an interesting dynamic, and you mentioned it in the previous segment, this Bucs team came out of the gate this season hot. Baker Mayfield was being talked about as MVP, and now I just see the cutaways of him when their defense blows a lead. And he just looks like Mad Bake. Yeah. And just as sports fans we know, and here in Charlotte we know that he can be a little sour.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and it's like one of those reunions, right? We're seeing some familiar faces, but I will say one thing about the Panthers that they have done really well is to hold the home court, right? Do really well on the home field, and they've done it against the Rams so far this season, and again, they've ran up against Baker Mayfield in the past, right? They were in those close couple games last year as well, and they might look to kind of build that momentum heading into these next few matchups. I mean, they play these teams twice in the next 3 weeks, which is, I can tell you from a tennis player, that is really hard to do, to beat the same person or the same team twice, especially in the short amount of span. You'll figure things out from that first matchup that you'll try to capitalize on the second one. And like you mentioned, both these teams are kind of struggling a little bit. Tampa Bay maybe a little bit more, losing 6 of their last 8. So just a situation where whether or not Carolina can take advantage of what really Baker Mayfield is struggling with. I know that he's getting some weapons back. We saw Mike Evans get back onto the playing field, but he wasn't able to kind of really find the end zone as much as they would have liked to as well. So that'll be an interesting matchup. I know Mike Jack mentioned it after the Saints lost. Said, hey, I know that this road's a little bit difficult, but we were going to have to beat this team anyway, so they're not really weary about the situation. I know that you had a chance to kind of go into the locker room, feel the vibe out for these guys, but I feel like they're trying to hold as much confidence as they can going into this game.
It certainly is not a locker room that seems to just be, defeated. They've done this how many times this year, where they've come off a loss and turned around and wiped the slate clean and won again. From the 49ers debacle to the Rams stunner was a 6-day span. So they know that they can do it. And you talk about the Bucs and their struggles and Baker Mayfield. He's got a banged up shoulder. It's not his throwing shoulder, but it has affected his ability to be mobile and kind of make that Baker magic that we're so used to, that we saw a lot of earlier in the season. He has been sacked 10 times in his last 5 games, thrown 5 interceptions to 6 touchdowns in those games. He's got Mike Evans back. He's got Chris Godwin back. Bucky Irving, who ran all over the Panthers' run defense last year, much different scenario with the Panthers' defense this year. He's back. Egbuka, the rookie receiver, he and T-Mac McMillan are neck and neck in the Rookie of the Year race as wide receivers in the NFC South. But what he's also got is a patchwork offensive line. And he was sacked 5 times against the Falcons. Panthers actually had 5 sacks against New Orleans somehow without generating like a ton of pressure. I mean, that's a quarterback that they were able to chase down. But I think if you're able to generate some pressure, and Ejiro Rivera, the defensive coordinator, doesn't like to blitz a whole lot, but
you might have to.
Now or never,
yeah, you kind of have to. Like
yeah.
you said, this is a banged up offensive line, right? And that's kind of fallen towards really the struggles that Tampa Bay has been able to have. Baker's not been able to kind of get the ball off, or at least find those guys in the amount of time. And again, we talked about it, just figuring out what kind of defensive line we're going to see, right? We know that one guy who is having a phenomenal season this year has been Derek Brown, right?
Yep.
How much of an X factor is he going to be this Sunday? You mentioned Ted McMillan. How much of an X factor is he going to be for the offense as well? And so being able to find these guys and capitalize to get that kind of pressure, especially on a guy like Baker, like you said, that's been struggling right now, I think is going to be very key for this team if they want to kind of pull off a win, at least in this first matchup against Tampa Bay. But it's going to take a lot. It's going to take everybody on this team, really.
Yeah, Derek Brown, I think, is going to be an X factor in any game. He was obviously the hero of that Rams game at the end, generating the pressure and getting the strip sack of Matt Stafford. Typical defensive tackle or interior defensive lineman doesn't have a whole lot of sacks, has less than 5, I believe, but is going to create for his teammates back there. And, you know, I think J.C. Horn's going to be motivated to go up against Mike Evans. And Mike Jackson is going to be motivated to do that as well. And Chris Godwin and Emeka Egbuka. I mean, these guys are hearing these names a lot. And as we saw in the Matt Stafford matchup, they didn't take kindly to that, and they went out there and they performed. But I look to, I would love to see, we saw J.C. Horn in a couple of corner blitzes last year. I would love to see a few of those. We've seen Trayvon Merrick on a safety blitz or 2 this season. I think you have to kind of generate pressure that way. But if you're able to get to Baker in his current state, he's not shown the ability lately to kind of make that sack evading run and throw or run for a first down play. So that's going to be key to this matchup. I know we'll talk about the playoff scenarios in a bit, but this was going to be a great atmosphere at Bank of America Stadium, but it's still a pivotal game. So I'm hopeful that fans still show out. It should be a nice day.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of mentioned another guy that we haven't talked a whole lot about, though, too, is that J.C. Horn, right? He's been a big factor, right? Especially in that game that they had against the Green Bay Packers. He got those 2 phenomenal picks.
Yeah.
How much of that momentum or how much of that kind of guy are they going to need to see against Tampa Bay? Not just Baker, but against those receivers like you've already mentioned. And the question of his health has to be a factor, though, as well. I know he missed a couple of games already, and so depending on how much of a healthy J.C. Horn that we see, I mean, I don't know if I want to say he's got to be a call to get a pick, but it wouldn't hurt if they want to come away with that win.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I'm calling the sack, you're calling the pick. J.C. Horn, his 2 worst games in a while, and especially this year, have been against the Saints. Like Chris Olave, JC is going to be carrying that with him into this game. He's got some tough matchups. He doesn't travel with any receiver in particular, so we're going to see a couple of different matchups. But, Baker's a quarterback that's liable to give it away. We knew that here in Carolina. Obviously, I mentioned the last 5 games, 5 picks. He's got a couple of multi-interception games mixed in there. So that's going to be key, as you mentioned, taking the ball away like they did against the LA Rams. They did it against the 49ers, but the offense couldn't pick them up. I think that's a great X factor. Some of these young edge rushers, Nick Scorton, Princely Uman-Mielen, they've been close a couple times lately. They got to get home and get to this guy before he can kind of make something happen. Before we go, we'll get into playoff scenarios next. Last 10 games against the Bucs, the Panthers have won 1 time. And they should have had a win last year. Chuba Hubbard fumbled. He made up for it a couple weeks later against Arizona, but you can't make mistakes like that in games of this magnitude. So hopefully we don't see that. And we'll be talking playoff scenarios for the Panthers in this Bucs matchup coming up to conclude tonight's episode of Panthers on the Plus. All right, welcome back to Panthers on the Plus. Nick Carboni here, joined by Miles Harris, talking Panthers and Bucks. The schedule makers sure know what they're doing. They get the division matchups to close the season. They picked the right two teams. Clearly, they saw maybe Carolina would be the ascending team in the NFC South to try to pry that division crown away from the Bucks, who have won it the last 4 seasons. Okay, Miles, we're going to go through some playoff scenarios here. Last week, the math was easy. There were like 2 scenarios. But because of that loss to the Saints, I mean, the simplest scenario for the Panthers to make the playoffs is to beat the Bucks this week and then beat them in 2 weeks down in Tampa Bay. Or, and there's a lot of these ors, because there's like 6 tiebreakers. It goes all the way down to coin flip. We're not going to get that far. So if the Panthers win and beat Seattle the next week, Seattle's obviously a really good team.
Yeah.
And then Tampa loses to Miami, the Panthers would actually clinch because they'd have a better record.
Right.
But the problem with that scenario happened today. Did you see what happened in Miami?
Oh, they benched Tua. They benched Tua. Yeah,
So now the Panthers would have to get help from Miami's backup, Quinn Ewers. The Texas kid, who obviously they see something in if they're going to install him here at the end of the season. They've been playing fairly well and put him in against over a guy that they're paying a whole lot of money. So that'll be interesting if it comes to that. If the Bucks win and then they beat Miami, the division is wrapped. So while it isn't a must-win in the sense of like, if we don't win, we're not the division champs by Monday. It is, if we don't win, we could not be the division champs 7 days from now.
And also the other factor with that Miami thing, though, too, is they also released Matthew Judon. So another defensive guy.
So their defense is depleted. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where you are, if you're losing this game, counting on Miami beating Tampa Bay. Because if Tampa wins this game at Bank of America Stadium, for lack of a better term, their ship has been righted, and they are going to feel really confident going to that Miami game, knowing all we got to do is win this game. And then we can get basically a week off. I know they'll be chasing, perhaps some seeding at that point. But,
right.
So, it's an interesting scenario, but it's nice to have these conversations around the Panthers this late in the season, which we don't often. I mean, 3 years ago when Steve Wilkes was interim coach, he went 6-6. It was like, yeah, there's a chance. And Ron Rivera would always carry those percentages around. Excuse me, I'm getting excited there. Hit the microphone. Ron Rivera would always carry the percentages around like, well, we have this % chance, and we still have a chance. And it'd be like, whew, you are.
Do we though?
5-11. So it is nice to be in a city where that is the case. I've noticed a few more Panthers flags, Panthers jerseys, and it's just been stale around here for quite some time.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate because of the situation that Tampa Bay has with the kind of those parts of the schedule, right? Obviously, they have a Miami, which is a lot easier to go against. Let's just be honest here. It's a lot easier to go against Miami than it is to go against Seattle.
Absolutely.
But if we got to be honest, though, too, we have seen more highs from Carolina beating better teams, and I don't want to say they're better than Seattle, but we also did just see Seattle have a close game with, no offense to a 44-year-old Phillip Rivers, right? And so it just depends on really what side of Seattle we're going to get, but also what kind of Carolina we're going to get. Now, obviously, it'd be nice to be able to win this first game, kind of let these cards kind of fall where they are. And again, I think that them playing at home is going to be a big factor. I mean, they are, besides the Bills game, I would say that, you've covered this game and this team for a while too. This team is just different at home. They really are. And so it's not necessarily the fan base. It's just they just look like they play better. I've seen them in practice even before and afterwards. They kind of have a bit of a different walk with them as well. And so there are a lot of scenarios that can kind of help. Hey, if Tampa Bay loses one game, it could be another. But just take it on your own. Just take it in the driver's seat and win this game.
Yeah, and I think the last time they were at home, they learned what their identity was. We talked about that in the first segment. Okay, maybe it didn't work out for them in the Superdome. That was always going to be a dogfight against a Saints team that is all of a sudden like, hey, we can spoil everybody's party, and we got a quarterback we kind of feel good about for once, and a defense that has a big chip on its shoulder, and veteran guys that don't want, they're going to be home in January. They want everybody else to be home in January. But I think 3 weeks ago or whatever it was against the Rams, Carolina, they handed the ball off to Chuba Hubbard and Rico Dowdle 35 times. It was basically a dead even split. They used Chuba Hubbard in the kind of swing pass game. They used Dowdle in that as well. And defensively, they had the 3 takeaways. And situationally, they took advantage of the back end of the Rams defense. They should absolutely be able to do that against the Bucks. So while there have been moments throughout this season where I think Dave Canales has coached a little too conservatively at times, despite having like one of the best fourth down success rates in the NFL this year, I think he just lets it rip, and he's got to let Bryce Young let it rip, because this defensive secondary is there for the taking as long as the pressure holds up. You've got to run. This offense does require you to set things up with the run. That's where I wonder, okay, New Orleans has done it to him. A couple other teams have taken that away. Can they overcome that? But I think if they stick to the run to set up the pass, they could have success offensively. And if they take care of the football, I think they'll be able to move down the field on this Bucks team and get in a scoring position.
And I was going to say, there was some good flashes, I would say, from that New Orleans game. Chuba kind of get a little more acclimated and being integrated into the offense. And the other thing I don't want to take away from New Orleans, though, too, is we also can't forget that New Orleans did beat Tampa Bay also earlier in the month as well. Yeah. So they could have also been kind of riding off of that momentum. I do like your take on kind of saying that, hey, they were able to find that success with the Rams. Obviously doing that at home. See if you can kind of replicate that. Do that again here against this matchup. It is there for the taking. Take advantage of it and get back to the run game. Find that success with the run game so that you can open it up, take the pressure off of Bryce, open up the playing field. I like seeing those guys operate, both Rico and Chuba, but also seeing guys like Ted McMillan get active as well. It's been a really big game changer for them, and even just his first year.
Yeah, all right, Panthers, Bucks this Sunday, 1 o'clock at Bank of America Stadium. It's going to be a big game, playoff implications on the line for Carolina. I think the Bucks' chance to win the division goes up to like 95% with a victory on Sunday. So it's a gotta-have game. And I think what helps the Panthers, 3 things that help the Panthers, right? Mm-hmm. When do they play the best? They play the best at home, they play the best at 1 o'clock, and they play the best when they're the underdogs. We got check all the way around for Carolina.
I like the way you think with that one.
I mean, we can't figure it, throw out the stats.
No, and that's the thing,
with this team, it's just where are they most comfortable? In this position. At home, backs against the wall, gotta have it. 1 o'clock on Sunday. Thanks for joining me and Miles Harris on Panthers on the Plus. We'll have an episode again for you on Friday night. See you then.
All right, folks, we're going to talk more Panthers on the Plus in 2 minutes. We'll see you right after this. All right, and we're back. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Panthers and a big game against the Buccaneers this weekend. Let's listen in.
Welcome in, everybody, to Panthers on the Plus. I'm your host, WCNC Charlotte Sports Director Nick Carboni. Generally, we have conversations every Monday night about the Panthers. We did so this week, but we're coming to you here on Tuesday night, and we're coming to you all week ahead of this big matchup between the Carolina Panthers and the Buccaneers. Wanted to reach back down into Tampa, Florida, and speak with our content partner, Sports Director Evan Klosky from 10 Tampa Bay. Evan, I figured we ought to get to know each other a little bit over these next couple of weeks here. Carolina and Tampa facing off 2 out of the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I mean, this was quite the move from the NFL. It's kind of interesting how they're able to prognosticate some of these things. Sometimes it's a little bit luck. Other times they know it's coming down the chute. And, at least for me, entering the season, I was actually somebody who said, when asked, hey, how do you think this division's going to shake out? I said the Buccaneers are going to win it again. But I did say that the Panthers were my number 2 in the NFC South, and I was not a Falcons believer. So I'm gonna give myself a pat on the back before we see if the Panthers can actually win the thing.
Evan Klosky's Q rating in the Charlotte metro area is skyrocketing right now.
Got to appeal to the audience you're talking to.
All right, we'll get into the matchup in a bit, but I want to talk about these two teams. Obviously deadlocked, top of the NFC South, but there are clear differences in how they got there and the feelings about how Carolina feels about being 7-7, which is, hey, that's nice. Wish we could take care of business a couple times along the way. And it feels like Tampa's sitting there ticked off. What's kind of the mood there in Tampa Bay with this Buccaneers group right now?
Oh, it's jumbled for sure. I mean, I'm sure everybody by now has seen the Todd Bowles cursed. The curse
Listen,
is flying
anytime
at
you
the
can
podium.
inject the F word into other regular words, that's you're mad. You're mad.
Look, I mean, Todd Bowles, I think, had 9 F-bombs in the matter of one response, and that probably is quite like double or triple the amount of times I've heard him curse, at the podium. Like, anybody who follows football dating back to Todd Bowles' days with the Jets, like, you never see that side of him. And we've always tried to tell people, fans here, is like, I understand that Todd Bowles is so stoic on the sidelines, but that is not how he is behind closed doors when he's talking with his team. Like, he has a different persona, and you finally got a glimpse of that. For the whole world to see. And now it's going to be interesting to see what the Buccaneers are able to do, because for all we've heard time and time again with this team is the culture of the building and everything's so great on the inside. And now you have the head coach essentially calling out his players, saying you're not doing enough. And that also comes on the heels of Baker Mayfield after the bye week when they lost to the Patriots. Baker Mayfield came to the podium and said, hey, when you don't execute during practice and you bring that into Sundays, that is a big problem. So we know ever since the bye week, this team, for whatever reason, certain players, we don't know who, they are not putting in enough work, or they're just not fixing the mistakes that they mess up during the week, and they're replicating them later in the week, which are game days. So yeah, you have a team that is teetering between ticked off and motivated, or about to crumble and collapse and have the whole organization have to turn over the coaching staff and certain players because things aren't going the right way. So, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The Panthers certainly feel like they're moving in an upward trajectory, even though I'm sure fans are sick and tired of the teetering of the highs and the lows. And here in Tampa, it's just like, this was a team entering the season we all thought could potentially compete for a Super Bowl appearance, at least. And it's becoming abundantly clear that that is not at all the case, and they have a lot more work than what we originally thought.
And before we get into the matchup with the Panthers, just kind of continuing that, like here in Carolina, yes, people are frustrated that they have these big wins and then these big letdowns, but you know what it's like in a building when jobs are on the line, and you're in that building right now, and I'm not. What do you think Bowles is? Do you think his days are numbered if they do not make the postseason, if they do not repeat as division champs, or you think it kind of depends on how things play out over the last 3 weeks?
if they do not make the playoffs, there is no way that you can bring Todd Bowles back.
Yeah.
It's just simply with the expectations this team had. At least, winning the division, under Todd Bowles, they've gone up one win every season up until this year. Like, at best, they can maybe tie last year's mark. But this would be a clear step back. Also, you have your head coach, who's a defensive coordinator, essentially, for your team, calling the defensive plays with a unit that has completely crumbled. So I don't know what reason the Glazer family would be able to bring him back.
Evan, it's not for all the marbles. It's just for some of them this week. We thought it was going to be for the whole shebang, potentially for Carolina. I guess I'm just wondering, with this matchup, you talked more to the players throughout the rest of the week. It's only Tuesday here. Did they view Carolina's loss to the Saints as a win for them? Like, they obviously do a little bit because it puts them back in a tie, but do you think it lifts their spirits at all, given the way things have gone for them?
Yeah, a lot of players. We got a handful of them on Monday just because they played on Thursday night, so it was a rare day where we can get into the building on a Monday. And a lot of them said exactly that. Like, it felt like a gift. It felt like we got handed a gift. Now the power is back.
All right, folks, if you want to see more of our interview, head over on our WCNC Plus app, of course. And in fact, Panthers on the Plus is going to continue at 9 o'clock right here after us. Don't forget our show at 11 p.m. We'll have not only the statements that have been sent out over the last few hours because of Greg Biffle and his family losing their life in that crash in Statesville, but we'll have more reaction as well for you tonight at 11 on WCNC Charlotte. Thanks for joining us here on WCNC Plus. We'll see you tonight.
They're not going to be in the playoffs.